Well, hey, I am so glad you guys are back for another week of 40 Days of Family. And this week is a big one. This is an important one for every family. If you have small children, you might be wondering, how do I talk to my kids about sex? When do I talk to my kids about sex? How much do I say? Those are great questions. If you're the parent of a teen, then you're just thinking, all I want is for my kids to want to stay pure until marriage. And I'll admit, that's a hard one to tackle in a 90-minute small group meeting, but we're going to talk about a lot of stuff tonight, so let's just dig in. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we can make as parents when it comes to teaching our kids about sex is assuming that it all boils down to the talk. It all boils down to just one conversation. Really, that conversation, when it happens, that's about the biology of sex. It's about the biology. You have to talk with your kids about the theology of sex. You have to talk about romance. You have to talk about family. There's a lot more to sex than just the act of sex. And to just have that talk and then tell your kids, don't do that till you're married. That's not enough. That's not enough to accomplish what we need to accomplish when it comes to teaching our kids about sex. And really, teaching kids about sex is a lifelong lesson. It begins when they're toddlers, and that may sound strange to teach them about sex when they're toddlers, but when your kids are little, that's the time to teach them that God made them special. God made them to be a boy or a girl, and God made their bodies to be special, and at that age, only mommy, daddy, doctors, sometimes siblings, only those people can see your bodies, and because your bodies were made for a specific purpose. And one day you're going to grow up to be mommies and daddies. When they get their first Bible story book, and you read to them the story of Adam and Eve, it's going to say God created Adam and Eve, and it's going to say they were naked. So that's a great time to teach them God made Adam and Eve. God made man and woman, and He made them just two genders, nothing else. And it was okay for Adam and Eve to see each other naked because mommies and daddies can see each other naked. That's a principle that you can teach your kids that help them down the road to understand better God's plan for sexual intimacy. It also opens up a door when you talk about Adam and Eve. It also opens up a door to teach them about sin and how sin affects us. And two really common mistakes that people make about teaching their kids about sex is that they teach them either not enough or they teach them too much too soon. It's a lifelong pursuit. You have plenty of time to do this. So gauge what you're teaching them, and sometimes it's too much too soon. I remember hearing the story of a little boy comes home from school and he runs home and he runs up to his dad and his dad goes, "Daddy, what is sex?" And so dad goes into panic mode and he starts thinking, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to teach my elementary age kid about this?" And so he starts trying to explain to him very awkwardly, where babies come from, and then he's got to explain how the babies get there in the first place, and then he panics and he starts drawing pictures, and it just goes so terribly wrong. And finally he gets to the end and he's out of breath and his heart is racing, and he looks at his son and he goes, "So do you understand?" And the little boy goes, "I just wanted to know what sex means on the test. It says sex, MF." That was too much, too soon. He just needed to know, was he M or F? And a couple things that can guide you through these conversations so that you're not giving too much too soon or you're not giving enough. There's a couple things that can guide you through that. And the first is really your child's curiosity. They're going to ask questions. Don't dismiss those questions. If they ask a question, it deserves an answer. And just don't be like that dad in the story and over-answer. Answer the question they ask and nothing more. That satisfy that curiosity. But let that kind of be your guide as to what they need to know and when. Second, really pay attention to what's going on around them. What is happening at school? What are they hearing on TV, the news, whatever? Pay attention to those things because they're going to have questions about those, and it's important that we are the ones answering our kids' questions. And then another common mistake that we make as parents is we wait too long. We wait too long to have these discussions. Think about this: the average age at which parents have the talk is like 13 or 14 years old. That's the national average now in the U.S. That seems high in this day and age, because the average at which kids are first exposed to online pornography is 12. So we've missed it by a year. You know, if you're having the talk at 13 or 14, you're probably doing it in response to something they already saw. And that's not the way to do it. You know, the average age at which teens have their first sexual experience is 16 or 17. So if you're having that talk at 14, you're probably too late. You know, they've already been exposed to it, and they're already being tempted to have that first experience. So the point is that you probably need to be having this discussion much earlier than you think that you need to, because they are getting exposed to things. And you know, if you want your kids to have a healthy biblical perspective on sex and sexuality, you may need to begin that discussion sooner than you thought. So be ready to have that discussion. And here are some things that you can do to create an environment. This is important, that your home is an environment that encourages healthy biblical attitudes towards sex, and that conversation about it is okay. First, prioritize a strong marriage. This was one of our 5 pillars, and it's important when it comes to teaching your kids about sex, because you know, if they see a healthy, strong marriage, that means they're seeing healthy affection between mom and dad. They're seeing healthy flirting. They're seeing healthy romance, you know, between mom and dad. They're seeing all of that in the context of marriage. So then to them, they grow up thinking this is normal for marriage. If the only place they see affection and flirting and romance and all of that is on television or online, then they're going to get a very worldly perspective of it. Getting a very worldly perspective. If they see it between a Christian mom and a Christian dad, they see that healthy affection, then they associate it with marriage, not any other relationship. Next, practice modesty in the home. I think this is an important one. You know, if it's common in your house to walk around in various states of undress or whatever, you know, your kids are going to be more likely to be comfortable showing a little more skin in public, you know, if they're used to it at home. So it's a good idea to set up your boundaries for modesty within the home. And I know there's exceptions to that, but set up those boundaries within the home. Let them see modesty modeled in the home. Dads, this one is on you. Train your sons to be gentlemen to their moms and their sisters. You want to have a home that values the opposite sex, that not a home that objectifies the opposite sex. So teach your sons to be gentlemen towards mom and their sisters. You know, model that for them, dads. Your sons should see you in the home being a gentleman. If you're not in the habit of opening your wife's car door when you guys get in the car, start doing that. Let your son see that. Pull her chair out, open doors for her when you're going into buildings, all those things. And then encourage your sons to do the same things, you know, encourage them to go open the car door for mom. Then also, dads, be a gentleman to your daughters. Date your daughters. Set a high standard for how your daughter is treated. Treat her like a princess all the time. If you treat her like a princess, when the boys come a-calling, and they will come a-calling, when the boys come a-calling, your daughter will know the difference in somebody that is interested in her and somebody that is interested in it. She'll know the difference, and she's going to gravitate towards the person who treats her better, who treats her like a lady, who acts as a gentleman. And that's the kind of young man you want your daughter hanging out with. Also, you need to validate their gender. Okay? At a very early age, validate their gender. And it seems weird that we have to do this, but we really do in this day and age, because if we don't, somebody else will. So it's important that we validate their genders. Let them know you are a boy, you are a girl. If they feel confused, tell them they're wrong, because they are, because God made them to be one or the other, boy or girl. So validate their gender. Let them know that you're proud of their masculinity. Let them know that they're beautiful. Their femininity is beautiful and should be embraced. Then we talked about this a few weeks ago, but be diligent and vigilant when it comes to screens and cell phones. Be diligent and vigilant. If you want a healthy environment when it comes to biblical sexuality, be very diligent when it comes to those phones. Those phones will mess them up quicker than anything else this day and age. Finally, make sure your kids know that it's okay to talk to mom and dad about sex. That's important. They will talk with somebody. They're going to talk with somebody. And if you're shocked when they by their questions, or if you feel like, if you make them feel like they're perverse or dirty by bringing up the topic, they're just going to go talk to somebody else about it. And there is no shortage of people who are out there who are willing to give them misinformation about sex and sexuality. And so you need to be the ones talking to them. So make them feel like, let them know that it's a safe place to talk to mom and dad about sex and sexuality. And also God's going to hold you accountable for what they learn. If they don't learn it from you and they learn it from someone else, God's not going to hold that person accountable. God's going to hold you accountable, because it's our job as parents to raise our children. It's our job as parents to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, so that they understand not just the biology of sex and sexuality, they understand the theology, they understand the relationship aspect between husband and wife, and they learn that best in the home. They get a godly perspective of it in the home rather than the worldly perspective they get out anywhere else. So, big discussions. You probably have lots of questions for each other. Maybe you have some great examples. Maybe if you're kind of at the other end of this parenting thing, your kids are a little older and you've been through all this, you've got some great experience to share with the folks in your group. So grab your Bibles, grab your study guides, and have a great time talking about this.